Will Aussies fork over top dollar for Apple's giant new iPhones?
And is it time for the Apple Watch to shine? Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin. Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined by a man who's been up since stupid o'clock talking about the latest batch of iGadgets, Alex Kidman, as we go behind the headlines in search of the big picture. We're joined by two great guests this week. We've got picker.com.au editor Lee Stark joining us again to talk about iStuff. Lee, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys. Always great to be here.
But before that, we're going to fire up the Vertical Hold satellite with Alex talking to News Corp National Tech Editor Jen Dudley-Nicholson direct from Cupertino. But first, over to the news desk. Wake up, Alex. What's new in tech?
Samsung is playing a game of will they, won't they, with their long-rumoured Galaxy X foldable phone. First, mobile CEO DJ Koh stated that it would release its foldable phone in November, ahead of Huawei's planned release of a similar device. But Samsung has now backed away from those comments, stating that timelines were yet to be confirmed, but that it might reveal some details at its developers conference in November instead. Depending on timelines, the foldable Samsung phone could run into the launch schedule for the rumoured Galaxy S10, unless, of course, the two phones end up being one and the same.
Twitter is going all in on local exclusive content deals, signing up a raft of local players including Fox Sports, SBS, the NRL, Seven West Media and Sony Music Australia. Mostly focused on video, the deals will see content partners like Sony dive deep into the archives to offer never-before-seen interviews and clips from the inaugural Australian Idol winner Guy Sebastian. Meanwhile, the Fox Sport deal promises highlights from the AFL and NRL final series, while the NRL deal could also stretch to include live streams of entire matches from the new Women's League.
Foxtel has relaunched its Foxtel Go streaming service. That's the IP-based solution that's different to Foxtel Now in that it's a freebie for Foxtel fixed line and satellite subscribers to watch on their mobile devices. Foxtel Go will now fully support HD video, and it'll also support Apple AirPlay and Google Chromecast for sending content up to a larger screen, but with a bit of a sting in the tail. If you actually want AirPlay or Chromecast to work, you not only need a full Foxtel subscription, but also a multi-room subscription, potentially chucking an extra $25 per month onto your bill if you don't already have it.
Members of the 3GPP International Mobile Standards Body are sunning it up in Queensland this week as they meet on the Gold Coast to ratify the new 5G standards. Even at this late stage, it's not locked in that 5G will support long-range signals required to suit Australian conditions, according to Telstra chief Andy Penn. While previous mobile standards were designed for more densely populated regions like Europe and the US, Penn is hoping that the 5G standard will offer a 200-kilometre range for each tower, making it much easier to reach Australians who live outside the major cities when 5G launches next year. So, Alex, $25 a month for Chromecast and AirPlay streaming on Foxtel Go? Tell him he's dreaming.
Well, I think Foxtel has long been dreaming of money. And they want money.
A lot of it. That's insane.
Well, yeah, look, I'll be totally honest. I'm not going to pay it. Foxtel Go's always been that weird little product that they had that was never quite given a reason for life over and above Foxtel Now. But I suspect their play here is more towards those people who already have multi-room, who figure, oh, I want Foxtel in multiple rooms in my house. Hey, I've now got this added little feature. Although I quietly suspect that an awful lot of Foxtel Go viewers are actually people who have relatives or friends with a full Foxtel subscription where they've just shared the login across.
So, Lee, what do you think? Are people going to pay $25 for something that they think they're kind of entitled to for free? Is it just going to drive people to find content elsewhere?
This is weird to me because I have readers who are actually really excited to this about this, and I just couldn't relate to them. Not just because I'm not a Foxtel person, but because, like you guys, I find that price it should be bundled in. It is insane. I think people will probably pay for it if they have a Foxtel account, only because they're kind of used to it now. I don't want to say it seems like
What, getting screwed by Foxtel?
Well, I didn't want to say that, but yeah, people are used to getting screwed.
I'm in that deep. Yeah,
but they're used to being kind of tossed around by Foxtel before, so it's another $25 to them. What bothered me about this release was that we've got the 4K thing coming up. Chromecast supports 4K if you've got one, and yet this doesn't at all. We checked with them, and it doesn't. And likewise with AirPlay. AirPlay doesn't support 4K, but presumably if you had an AirPlay-enabled app, why isn't there an Apple TV app to just let you cut the middleman out? And yet there isn't either. It seems like a half-baked measure. Like, this is the sort of thing they've had cooking up for a few months ago. Yeah, we'll release this, and this will just get people to buy another iQ box because they'll realize the limitations of this pretty bloody quickly.
On the Apple front, I'm pretty sure that's because they don't want Apple taking 30% of their money. And it is kind of a money play, although it strikes me it's kind of weird. At that $25 price, after 4 months, you could buy the somewhat crashy Foxtel Now box, but then you'd still have to pay $25 a month to cast to the Chromecast-capable Foxtel Now box if you had one of those. It really feels like a money play. And their classic argument was that it was to do with streaming rights and the rights that they had for certain pieces of content. But, Gesundheit there.
I've got the summer snottage.
This does just seem like a money play. And I think it's the HD is good and Go is not a bad product in and of itself, but this just feels like it's going to backfire on them for a segment of the community that's aware, and for the segment that isn't aware and maybe already has multi-room, it's probably just a nice little extra.
So are we getting closer to the point where more people can ditch Foxtel for Foxtel Now? Because it's not always clear. The difference between Foxtel Now and Foxtel Go is Foxtel Go is, as you say, what you get for free if you pay for Foxtel, let's call it Foxtel Home, where Foxtel Now is a totally separate online service. But Foxtel Now is built into a whole lot of devices. It's on games consoles. It's on all those set-top boxes. Foxtel Go is never built into any of those things because they only want you watching it on mobile devices. How dare you think you could watch it on a real damn screen, you know? Are we getting to the point now where more people will go, well, this is ridiculous, Foxtel Now will fulfill my needs?
Look, I think the thing with Foxtel Now and their positioning with it has always been very, very clear. Foxtel Now is there for the people who don't want an ongoing Foxtel subscription. It's essentially their Game of Thrones product for the people who are happy to pay for Foxtel for 2 months to watch Game of Thrones and then kind of move on. And they are in this weird position, though, where they've got Foxtel Now on one side, and that seems to fit more the kind of 21st century model of IP streaming. And then they've announced, well, actually, for our fixed line stuff, that's all going to be satellite. And we discussed that a few weeks ago. And I wonder, you know, where the junction point between the two is, and maybe the point is that there's not meant to be. That Foxtel Now is for the more techie crowd that's doing a lot of Netflix streaming, that actually doesn't particularly care about the screen or the access or things like that. They just figure this will just work. And the fixed Foxtel satellite service is for those who just want to go, no, I want a box that says Foxtel in my living room. It does things. I don't need to think about the internet at
Alex,
all.
I'm a Stark, which means in Game of Thrones lore, I'm going to wait until the damn show is completely done before I go buy the series, let alone Foxtel.
Spoilers,
people
you're not going to survive
attached
long.
to Lee. Yeah, do not get attached to Lee as a character on Vertical Hold, people.
So I'm now going to crank up the vertical hold satellite. Yes, folks, it's still in the air, and cross over to Cupertino, where Jen Dudley-Nicholson from News Limited has been at the Apple iPhone XS launch. Jen, can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's working well.
Excellent, excellent. You could say that it was magical and revolutionary, but obviously those are words that probably belong to Apple now. It's certainly got the money for them. Was there enough magical and revolutionary stuff at the launch this morning to get you excited?
Well, look, I'm never really sure how much magic is involved in technology, but there was certainly enough to keep me interested and keep me awake at what was a ridiculous hour in Australia. And they certainly launched a lot of products, which I'm always a big fan of.
And they launched a lot of big products because, I mean, the headline act here has to be the iPhone XS and XS Max, although I'm predicting straight away that people will be calling it the XS for the rest of its shelf life. They're bigger, obviously. They're bigger than the iPhone X was last year, but is there more to it than just, hey, we've supersized them?
There's a little bit more to it than that. So with the Max, I mean, certainly the headline is that it's a big phone. And this is Apple's biggest screen on a phone ever. This is a 6.5-inch screen. And yes, it may be a bit taller, so it might not quite be as wide as some others. But this is bigger than the Note phone, at least on paper. So they've pulled off a bit of a coup there, and I'm not against it because I'm a bit of a phablet fan. But there are additions in addition to that. So the camera is a little bit better this year. Each year the camera seems to get a little bit better, and this time you've got a bigger sensor involved, and you can actually play with the blur in the background this time, which we've seen on phones before. Like Apple craftily said in the presentation that we haven't been able to do this on a camera. And no, you can't change the aperture on a dedicated camera, but we have seen this in Huawei and Samsung phones before. They're talking about both of these devices, both XS phones, and I want to say in XS as well. Both of those phones have a more durable screen on them, apparently this time, more durable glass. However, I don't want to test that out because I feel very awkward about the amount of expense involved.
I don't want to think about what the cost of those screen replacements is going to be. Like Apple Care
oh my gosh,
often doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think if you're buying these things, it might for these because they're going to be frightening.
Look, I will admit to this. I actually put an iPhone on the top of my car one time and drove through a tunnel all the way across Brisbane, and it was still on top of the car. I felt really lucky that time, but I would feel super lucky if I did it with this phone, which is potentially going to cost $2,369.
Hang on, how much? How much? I did actually know this.
$2,369. Sorry. I mean, it's if you get the top model, and you do get, by the way, 512 gigabytes of storage with this. So they've matched Samsung's Note, and it's an awful lot of storage. So people who are going to buy this phone and get the big version of it, you can download all the apps that you could ever want, and then some in addition to that. So I mean, it sounds like a good phone and a solid phone, but my goodness, that's a solid price.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to check the Porsche edition of the Huawei. I think it was the Mate 10, or it might have been the P20 Pro. I think tipped the scales at ever so slightly more, but I think they released like 3 of those in Australia. Almost nobody could buy one, let alone whether they would. This is easily...
It's kind of like back to the Nokia Virtu phones, yeah.
Yeah, this is easily going to be the most expensive mainstream phone Australia has ever seen, or has seen to date, I guess. They can always go more expensive next year. But on the flip side of that, they've also got the incredibly grammatically incorrect iPhone XR. It totally should be the iPhone XS, but I'm sure I'll lose that argument with them.
See, that's where you're wrong, because I'm calling it the iPhone XR.
Costs a bit more than a tenner, though.
It does. I mean, maybe it's a tenor in sort of like in an aria kind of way. I'm not sure. It's interesting, though, because we're talking about this XR, that's going to bother me, as being sort of the budget version and the cheaper version. But when you look at it, the cheapest it can be is $1,229. So even though it's a budget version and you're getting, like on the outside, there's an aluminium frame to it. It's only got one camera on the back, although you do still get the faster chip. So even though you're getting kind of a scaled-down version of it, it's still kind of an expensive phone. I mean, back in the day, we all considered anything over $1,000 to be flagship, and now apparently over $2,000 is the new flagship.
Yeah, well, half the price of a XS Max. Bargain. But I mean,
sure, just cut it in half.
You've had some hands-on time with these new phones. Do you think they live up to that pricing just off kind of first impressions?
Look, I mean, I'm impressed with the Max because I do like a big phone. I've always been a fan of sort of the phablets that that started with the Note and so forth, and I like that how phones have grown. I mean, it's impeccably put together. Apple, for all of the, you can criticize them about their descriptions of things as magical and sort of coming into markets late in some cases, but they really do put together a slick item, and the Max is definitely a slick phone. It has a really nice screen to it. I don't want to test out whether, the phone actually gets scratches on it if you put it in with your keys, for example, which I've definitely done in the past. But the screen did have a really nice sheen to it. It was very curved on the edges. It looks really nice. And I only had a small time sort of operating it, so I don't know what the speed will be like, although if it's anything like what Apple is promising with this new A12 chip, then it should be quite amazing. I don't know whether that will be worth $2,300 for everybody, but certainly it's a nice to have.
Fair enough. Did you get any, I suppose, wrists on time with the new Apple Watch Series 4?
I did have a bit of a play, and it's interesting because it's got a bit of a haptic feedback thing happening. So when you zip through the menu now, you get a little haptic sign on your wrist. Haptic vibration on your wrist. It's quite pretty to look at. I don't think they really played it up enough, but when you see it on your wrist, it's actually a little bit taller. So it's a little bit longer. It's not quite square anymore. And so if you're showing off watch faces, and there are some really nice new watch faces too, which it's about time they came out. But yeah, so when you show off the new watch faces, when you have a look at photos on the screen, it actually looks a lot prettier. So I don't think that they really made a big deal about that because they were too busy talking about sort of the medical and, I guess, more important aspects of this new watch.
Fair enough. An exciting moment, though, to be sure. Did it detect you having a heart attack while you were wearing it?
It didn't. So maybe I was very calm and I wasn't quite considering the price of everything at that point. Or maybe I just have a decent heart that's been made strong by too many caffeinated gummy bears. But I'm really fascinated by this idea that it will pick up on your heart rhythms, because I'm obsessed with, when my heart rate goes up and when it goes down too far, and what resting heart rate I've got and all those sorts of things. So to be able to sort of take that to the next level and just really freak yourself out by what your heart rhythm is doing, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I found it really fascinating that they had someone from, I think it was the American Medical Association, reasonably high up doctor. I forget his name off the top of my head because it's already been a long day. But talking about it as a kind of almost medical grade device, because a lot of companies shy away from that because they don't want to kind of end up in the insurance aspect, shall we say, of it, of saying, hey, this is actually a quality product. Apple seems to be tilting more towards that, though.
Yeah, I thought that was really bold, but I think it's something that they've had to really test this thing before putting it out there, because I don't know if you know much about America, but they have lots of bad food here and they tend to sue people a lot amongst their better qualities. So you really don't want to run afoul of Americans who, are told one thing and then, your medical device doesn't back it up. So I think they've had to do a lot of testing of this sort of thing. I think they've had it sort of in the works for at least 2 years that I know about, probably longer. I reckon that they've tested the absolute bejesus out of this. And so they must be quite confident if they've got the approval of the Food and Drug Administration. Although that said, they're actually not going to roll this one out until next month, I believe, so towards the end of the year. And even then, it will only be for America at first, and then they'll have to get approval of the various medical organizations in different countries before they can actually put that on the watch and say, look, this is information that is reliable and you can give this to your doctor so that he or she can have a look at it.
So presumably that's a software upgrade, though. They're not selling a separate America-only watch.
No, they're not. So it will just lie in the phone dormant, as I understand it, because it's actually like an electrical sensor that's at the back of the watch, much like the heart rate sensor. So instead of using an optical sensor, it's an electrical sensor, which sort of uses, as I understand it, sort of senses what's in your skin and the electrical current in your skin, and that's how it operates.
Right. And you said before that, it was a busy day and they were launching a lot of products, but there were a lot of things that people were sort of expecting that we didn't see. There was no iPad Pro, there were no updated MacBooks, and that AirPower charger just seems to have vanished off the face of the earth, unless they were hiding it in a corner of a room somewhere.
Look, I looked all around that room and I did not see it, even though I quite want it. So no, this is something that we saw. It was yonks ago. I think it might have even been at the last iPhone launch.
It was, yeah.
It was a long time ago. So we haven't seen that board come out yet. And it was basically an extended version of a wireless charger, but you could put your watch beside your phone on it. I would have expected that it would have come out before Christmas. So maybe it will still sneak out, and they just didn't want to muddy the water, given that Apple were launching 3 phones and some new watches today. So maybe that was just considered too much.
I guess so. Although, I mean, for the iPhone 10 we're not seeing that one for a month. They're flipping the script on what they did last year with the 8 and the 10 by making the lower priced one. We can't say cheap. It doesn't appear anywhere on Apple's website, the word cheap. But they're flipping the script by making that one the one that appears last, which I think is also really curious strategy.
It is a bit of an interesting strategy, but I suppose the iPhone 10, even though back in the day, as of yesterday, it had the highest price of a mainstream Australian phone as well. So $1,829. Oh, remember the days when that was cheap, or expensive rather, and now it's considered cheap. So maybe that because that one sold so well and they were able to sort of prove themselves that they could sell a phone of that sort of price bracket, maybe they do want to put this out first and make sure that everybody can see it and consider it, and then if they don't, they've got a fallback option. They just have to wait a month around for it and think about themselves.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Jen. I'll let you get back to the caffeinated gummy bears.
Thank you very much. Will do.
So, Lee, are you going to be rushing out credit card in hand to spend a very large sum of money on an iPhone XS Max?
I have a child, so probably not. But
who would like to go to university?
Yeah, let's just talk about getting through the next couple of years first, shall we? She's only 1. But I'm having a hard enough time trying to work out how to say the iPhone's model name, let alone if I want to buy one at this point in time, because I don't know, maybe it's just me. When I see a Roman numeral accompanied by a little letter, like with the iPhone 10, how I've been calling it iPhone X for pretty much the entire year, I'm now going to call this the iPhone XS because, 1, its price point is absolutely crazy, as you noted, and also 2, it looks like it reads as XS. But you're pronouncing it properly, which is absolutely crazy.
Well, I'm a crazy kind of guy. The one actually that annoys me in a linguistic sense is actually the cheaper one we won't see for a month, and we'll get to how it's not exactly cheaper in a minute. The iPhone XR,
XR.
Because in a singular sense, my head wants to say that it should be the iPhone XS. But look, I mean, the XS probably doesn't fuss Apple in a real sense as long as they get your money. And that price point, I think, might be a barrier for Australians, given that it's so much higher. It crosses that $2,000 threshold. And whilst a certain number of people will just get them on contracts and not think about that, even on contracts, you're going to see larger handset repayments as part of that, even from a vendor like Vodafone, where they split them off from the mobile plan. Those 12-month contract handset payments from Vodafone are going to be quite high because they've got to cover the cost of a very expensive
It's
phone.
crazy for a lot of reasons. I'm writing an article at the moment pretty much about those costs because look, granted, this is the first time we're seeing 512 gig in an iPhone. And so, I mean, if you compare even the 256 gig price of what the iPhone XS, XS, whatever you want to call it, is, I mean, it's not dramatic difference from what the iPhone XS was last year. It's the XS Max, it's the and the 512 gig versions. I mean, we were all complaining last year that we were approaching the $2,000 limit, which is a really, really horrific sort of a price tag for any phone, let alone a phone that looks this good. But then a phone that's technically in an S year, it's not even a smashing new design technically, but we're approaching now a $2,500 price point. We're only 100 and was it 2,369? So we're not dramatic. We're barely $200 off the cost of $2,500. And I think at that point, I'm not sure. I mean, the laptop argument was pretty sound with the iPhone 10, but now it makes even more sense. Get a really good laptop, like actually a surprisingly good laptop or a phone, and I mean, most people don't buy iPhones outright, but that is still a staggering amount of money.
Look, it is, and I guess they're just saying, hey, let's charge what the market will bear, and they'll find that out. It's slightly surprising, given how recent the Note 9 launch was, though, that the Note 9 512 gig ends up looking positively affordable
Absolutely.
by comparison.
And that's actually a really important factor to make, but I think that's also partly why they've released a 6.5-inch phone, because now they can say, we are bigger. It's mine, and no one's ever going to notice the difference. But, they have the biggest, I guess, one of the biggest phones you can find now. It just so happens to be also one of the most expensive in the world.
Is it a bit rich that they got rid of the iPhone SE and the 6S, and that now your entry level budget model is the iPhone 7, and even this budget XR thing costs more than $1,000? Like, are they not even pretending? I know they don't like words like budget and cheap, whatever their word is for that. They're not even pretending really to have an economical option.
I've been looking.
It's not their market positioning. It just isn't. I mean, I checked this the other day. You can't find, or I couldn't find, a single instance of the word cheap on Apple's website. It's just not there at all. They don't believe in the word, and they position themselves as, as a Ferrari of phones. Ferrari don't sell their cars for the same price you can buy a Toyota Yaris, but they both roll down the road the same way.
The other factor in this, and I was looking at this all of today, well, not all of today because I was had some actual work to do, but I was looking at this today, and we always knew the iPhone 6S was going to be retired, so it's actually not that big of a deal. But the iPhone SE, it's the def of a phone that had a 3.5mm jack. It's a def of an old design. It's the def of pretty much everything that represents the old iPhone layout. I'm annoyed they got rid of it simply because I like the idea of having a small phone for people, but now the smallest phone, as you said, is something like the iPhone 7 or iPhone 8, both of which are still ticking around. I think the part of me is more annoyed that the iPhone 7 still costs about $750 odd as a starting point, and they could have actually really straddled that mid-range and given the likes of Huawei and Oppo and anyone else in that category, Motorola, for instance, something to really play against. The problem is, and it is as Alex said, they don't need to. They see themselves as making the best phone around. So if people are still going to happily pay for an iPhone 7 or an iPhone 8, which are still actually great phones by today's standards, if they're still going to pay for them because maybe they like the button or maybe they don't want to spend too much, then absolutely. Of course, they also have another option.
Yeah, look, the iPhone XR is an odd one, but again, it's $1,200 odd bucks. It's not cheap, but again, Apple doesn't do cheap, and they don't want to as well. They want to be seen as that aspirational brand, especially for China. And one of the more fascinating things with that is the fact that the Chinese are going to get a proper dual SIM model of these iPhones, where we will get, well, actually, I suspect we will get just a single SIM for the Australian market in effect, although Apple's talking it up as a dual SIM because it's a single real-world physical SIM and then their eSIM product. That's been around for a number of years, but I'm yet to see an Australian carrier pick it up for
don't the
a
iPads
phone model.
Have that right now? The iPads you can get in Australia with the SIM have, because I've had to activate by random, like by sheer chance, while I was over on a junket once, my SIM picked up and then it asked me when the SIM wasn't there to actually fire up the eSIM.
The hardware's there. They don't change the hardware, but you've got to have a carrier that supports it. This is the problem. And as such, I think the models that we get in Australia will be hardware identical. Apple only ever makes 2 or 3 different models, typically the Chinese model, the international model, and sometimes they've made a US model to cover CDMA. The hardware doesn't change that much, but you've actually got to have support for that built in. And I mean, as we're recording this, it's not clear, to be fair, but I would be very surprised to see the carriers come out and say, oh yeah, we'll do dual SIM just for Apple, because every other phone maker that does a dual SIM phone, whether it's a big player like Samsung or a small player, they'll do a dual SIM model, and then the model you get through the carrier will be single SIM only, because that's the way the carriers want it.
Why would they get into dual SIM now? It's been this sort of obscure, at least in Australia, it hasn't really been a mainstream thing, but it's been around for a long time. Why is now the point for Apple to say, yeah, let's go all in on dual SIM?
To understand Apple and what it's doing, you've got to look to China. Okay. And the Chinese market is very big on dual SIM. I mean, it's been a very big thing across Asia for a long time, but that's where they see their growth. There's however many billion Chinese.
I get that bit. Why is dual SIM big in China? Is it to do with the fact that they want to get the best data deals and automatically switch between services, or is it to do with the fact they're trying to bypass certain things? Why do they?
I thought it was travel. That's what I'd heard. Whereby obviously having one internal, and if you're doing a lot of international travel, having the extra SIM for that. But I could be mistaken.
Travel's a perfectly good option, and obviously, Chinese tourism's a very big thing now. But it can be a costs thing. Obviously, it can be that classical thing that people always try to tell dual SIM phones with, which was, one SIM which is your business mobile and the other which is your personal one. There's that as well. As to why Apple has waited, I guess they've just not seen market pressure, or they've worked out a way to do it that's quite cost effective for them. Because the other thing that Apple does with this stuff is it builds its devices to an absolutely precise level, which makes them very good, but also to a very specific price point. They are infamous for being quite brutal in terms of how they negotiate for prices of components. It was quietly, rumored to be one of the reasons why, in fact, last year's iPhone X was so expensive, because they essentially had to go cap in hand to Samsung to say, please, sir, can we have some nice OLED screens?
And it's good that they're actually using OLED screens, because I think we're seeing them on at least one other device. I mean, we see them on the phones, but the Apple Watches are now OLED as well, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And the new Apple Watches, look, they interest me. I like the design. They're Apple design, and Apple makes nice-looking stuff. And some of the stuff that they were doing around health I found fascinating. Obviously, I discussed that with Jen earlier. But I'm still in that position where I'm personally someone who loves a smartwatch. I always wear a smartwatch. But I'm still waiting for that absolutely must-have mass consumer feature that says, this is why you must have a smartwatch. Not, oh, that's a nice thing.
Bizarrely, I've actually found that the Apple Watch is my favorite Apple device. And it's hard for me to explain why. I think I've been able to identify what it is, because I'm actually normally an Android person, and I just haven't found an Android watch I really connect with, outside of, I guess, Samsung's Gear watches. But the reason I like the Apple Watch, I think, is because it actually feels like it integrates with the apps in many ways better than what I see on Android watches. And also, and this is a deeply personal thing, the photo frame app, the photo frame watch face that you get, which allows me to flick through all the photos and videos I have of my daughter, it's something that hasn't worked ever really well on any other smartwatch I've used. So the Android Wear ones don't work really well. The Gear one doesn't really have one. It's like one photo and that's it. It seems really stupid, and I'm going to admit this. I'm basically wearing a $500 digital photo frame on my wrist, and that's crazy.
Live in the dream, baby.
They have your money.
That's crazy to think about. That's right.
Yeah, their dream, not your
but
dream.
That's crazy to think about, that, because the main reason at the moment I use an Apple Watch is that. And at the moment, that's actually why I like using it. What drives me nuts about the Apple Watch, obviously this is Apple's playground, is a watch, in my opinion, should be platform agnostic. You should be able to bring it to an iPhone or an Android. It shouldn't really matter. And you can do that with an Android Wear device or Wear OS. You can do it with a Gear. You just can't do it with an Apple, and that really bothers me.
Yeah, the walled garden approach, it's very classically Apple. And actually, speaking of the walled garden, we also didn't see a whole bunch of other things that were suggested, from the Air Power mat that I'm still keenly waiting on. I know Jen said she was also waiting
It's
on.
a
hell is an
wireless
Air
charging
Power
mat
mat?
that supports 2 devices.
We did that joke a couple of weeks ago, sir. You weren't paying attention, and for anyone else listening in, go and listen to the old episodes, because they're awesome. But leaving that blatant plug aside, we also didn't see new MacBook Pros, and they quite often push those out just as part of these announcements. That's an interesting play, because certainly they will not, in this day and age, they won't do a separate launch for a MacBook Pro. They'll just quietly push them out if they're going to happen at all. And also no new iPad Pro. Lee, do you think it's reasonable to be disappointed when we only get
I don't
4
know.
new
I
Apple
mean,
products?
we know that October's probably going to be busy. I think it's totally acceptable. I mean, we knew that this was going to be an iPhone launch with 3 iPhones. We knew that. Every rumor told us that. Nothing about that's new. We had a feeling that it was going to be another Squircle style Apple Watch. They weren't going to adopt the circle. They were going to go to a slightly thinner bezel. I think it was optimistic to hope that they would push the MacBooks in like they have in previous years. But part of me thinks that given Microsoft Surface has a launch in early October, and we know the iPhone XR XR, God, you've got me saying the name properly. What have you done? We know that launch is coming in October. It kind of makes sense that they'll, somewhere in the mid to late October, they're going to launch an iPad Pro with slimmer bezels, that notch that we've seen in the iOS 12 beta. And alongside, in the background, they'll do MacBook Pro. They'll probably do a new MacBook. And, they might just finally friggin' upgrade that annoying, completely low-end twisted pneumatic screen on the bloody MacBook Air. They'll fix that thing once and for all. Maybe.
So that just about wraps up yet another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Lee for joining us for the show.
Thanks, guys.
Now I'll just try to crank up the Vertical Hold satellite again to thank Jen. Whoa! No, it's crashed into a river. But she knows that she has our thanks. And as always, we love to get your feedback on the show. Do you have an opinion on Apple's new watch and iPhone products? Do you think they're too expensive? Are you just keen to get hold of them? Do you think we're blatantly wrong? Let us know. Tell us via Twitter or on the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
Thanks everyone for listening. And remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends, grab their phone, hit the subscribe button on their phone. Leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your great podcasts. Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
No, wait, I did that joke with Jen. Cut that bit completely. I am so tired.
I can see why.
I am so tired.
You've got to have editorial standards, people, and that does not meet those editorial standards.
No, it doesn't.
There's not nearly enough coffee to keep Alex awake today.